profesora.
So, well, we start with a pun in the very first word in the title, right, which is written with an R rather than the W-R-I-T-E. And, well, that right there is full of meaning. What is right, and how should we write? It seems to me is what she is wanting to explore here. And on the one side, there's the right and straight, the right way, and in the other side, there's that garden that she talks about that creeps into the language.
One thing, you know, that a reader notices immediately is the structure and the form of the poem as well. So not only does she play with actual devices, like literary devices and terms, but she's playing with the structure and form and the way that language meanders and our thoughts meander, you know, here and there and everywhere. The poem does the same thing on the page. And so as we follow her thoughts that move from language to language and from reference to reference, so we're also sort of following the way the form moves snake-like on the page as well. And keeps it going, I think. It's beautiful.
You know, like so many of Carmen's poems, this poem is in part a kind of ars poetica, so it's a manifesto of her poetic agenda, and it's a cri de coeur. It's a call for a certain kind of poetic expression against the neat, ordered, you know, traditional way of approaching poetic invention. Here she's calling for messiness and mixedness and mezclas and mestizaje, and you know, she's doing it in a playful way that itself seeks to engage and, in some respects, subvert English literary tradition. You know, she, in the end of the poem, takes us to Chaucer.
Right.
You know, Chaucer, who writes in English at a time when that was improper, when English was the language of the barrio. And he was writing in a time when French was the court language, was the language of the elite. And so Chaucer makes this daring gambit to write in the language of the barrio. And here Carmen is reminding us that the world of the common people, the world of the everyday, the world of the barrio, has its own poetry. And it's not always symmetrical, it's not always ordered, it's not always metered. Sometimes two is spelled with the number two, the word two, when she says at the end of the poem. Yeah.
But she's not texting.
Yeah. So it's a combination of kind of manifesto and a call to poetic arms. She's calling for people to speak in their true voice. You know?
Well, yes, and that has so much to do with identity, because language, the language in which you choose to voice your persona depends on what persona comes out. Mm-hmm. And you speak Spanish, and you're speaking in a different mode, in a different way, with different references, even with cariñitos and aguas and besitos and familia. And it was interesting to see the words that she chooses to put in Spanish when she does this code switching are words like hierbitas and rosas and agua, and they're full of color and almost affection. She uses diminutives, which again, like cariñitos,
nurturing,
which is loving and affectionate, and she seems to counter that with, perhaps unfairly, but at least in this poem, kind of a preciseness, a sharpness, a squareness that she ascribes to the English language, or at least what that publisher wants her to abide by. So there's a real point-counterpoint and a real contrast just in the terms that she chooses to define English as, and the persona that she assumes when she brings in Spanish through that code switching.
Mm-hmm.
And I enjoy I guess you might call it a jab. It's not really a jab, it maybe a slight jab of this idea of this code switching and writing in the language of the people. This is not so new. I think, and anytime anyone decides to present themselves, their identity as complex or as not, being fit in a certain way, or the way that other people, that's easy for people to understand, that there will be resistance. So this idea of two languages or of writing in multiple personas, and this is not so new. It's always been there, but people still are uncomfortable with that idea.
And her voice here is also, it's rejecting that approach to poetry that is rooted in judgment and ideas of correctness. Agents sit and glare hairy brows over foreign words and almost trying hope, say, it's not French, is it? So she's, in place of that spirit of judgment, she brings a kind of embrace of rascuachismo, of the match, the Tex-Mex match, and rascuachismo being the kind of improvisational spirit of Mexican-American creativity. And at the end of the poem gives us almost a sense of an eros. There's an erotic quality to this mixing of languages. Two tongues in one kiss. So it's, I think, justifiably naughty in that sense. She brings in a little naughty note into this call to poetic arms. She's being a little naughty, perhaps. It's a good thing.
Well, I think that this issue with Chaucer is important, because what she's trying to do is to have the status quo of today, understand that English wasn't always, as you mentioned, the language of those in power. So in England, at the time of Chaucer in the Middle Ages, if you were cultured, you spoke French, and English was, as you mentioned, for plebeian. So when she brings that questioning of the value and of the power of the dominant one, she's really subverting this whole idea of who is powerful and saying, hey, wait a minute, there's this history here, and what's the future going to be like?
I think that also, I want to also go back to this idea of a not so straight-edged future, the implications of not just in language, as in with ending with the eros, but also the implications of, a world that is mixed. She doesn't, explicitly say, we're moving toward a global society and you need to wake up. But I love the implied, sort of sometimes subtle and sometimes not so subtle quality of the ending. But even more so, I think even more so possible, even more so than the eros, the erotic part of this, which it gets very sexy toward the end, is this idea of intimacy. There's a beautiful, it ends not just with sort of a lovely, sort of erotic quality, but I think even lovelier is sort of the intimacy that she forms with the reader, and the ideas, of, sometimes this is greater than, not just greater than two people, greater than 100 people, greater than, what we can imagine. And so by ending it with this sort of very intimate connection with the reader, there are many ways that can be interpreted.
It's a poem Chaucer would have loved.
She would have loved.
And she seals it with a kiss.
She does.
Adieu.
She does.